I was being brought to set in a wheelchair. Like, I couldn't walk that far. So I had to tell everybody because I needed help. You know, I needed someone to help me stand, and I needed someone to help. I needed someone to help me to get there.
There are moments in Hollywood that stop you cold. Moments where the carefully constructed wall between what the public sees and what actually happened behind closed doors suddenly comes crashing down. And when Christina Applegate finally sat down and started talking, really talking about her decades-long relationship with Ed O'Neill, the entertainment world collectively held its breath. Because what came out of that conversation was not the kind of polished, publicist-approved story that celebrities usually tell. It was raw, it was honest, it was deeply human. And for millions of fans who grew up watching the Bundy family tear each other apart on screen every week, it completely reframed everything they thought they understood about one of television's most beloved shows. This is not a story about scandal. It is not a story about betrayal or secrets kept for malicious reasons. This is something far more powerful than that. This is the story of a 15-year-old girl who walked onto a television set in 1987, frightened and uncertain, and found something she was not expecting to find. Something that would anchor her through one of the most turbulent careers in modern entertainment history. Something that would hold her steady when her health began to fail. Something that would prove, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the most meaningful things that happen in Hollywood almost never make it onto the screen. Christina Applegate has spent the better part of 4 decades being one of the most recognizable faces in American entertainment. She went from playing the dizzy, lovable Kelly Bundy to becoming a critically acclaimed actress whose range and emotional depth surprised everyone who had written her off as just a pretty face from a raunchy 90s sitcom. She built a career on her own terms. She fought battles the public never knew about. And through all of it, there was one constant, one person who never wavered, one relationship that she is only now beginning to fully acknowledge in public. And what she has chosen to say about Ed O'Neill and what their reunion ultimately revealed changes the narrative completely. To understand what Christina exposed, you first need to understand the world that she and Ed O'Neill inhabited for 11 years. Married with Children was unlike anything that had ever appeared on American network television before it arrived. The show debuted on Fox in 1987, and from the very first episode, it made its intentions absolutely clear. This was not going to be The Cosby Show. This was not going to be Family Ties. The Bundy family was crude, loud, financially struggling, and magnificently dysfunctional. They insulted each other with gleeful abandon. They failed constantly and spectacularly, and audiences absolutely adored them for it. But here's what the cameras never showed. Here's what the laugh track never captured. Behind the scenes of that gloriously chaotic show, there was a genuine family forming. Not the kind that gets written into a script by a team of writers sitting in a room trying to manufacture warmth. The kind that forms organically, slowly, through shared experience and mutual respect, and the 1,000 small kindnesses that accumulate over years of working alongside someone every single day. Christina was 15 when production began. 15 years old, stepping into a role that required her to be a teenage sex symbol in a show that was deliberately provocative. The character of Kelly Bundy was written to be the butt of jokes about her intelligence and the subject of jokes about her appearance. The wardrobe was revealing, the storylines were edgy, and the attention that came with playing that character from fans, from the media, from people within the industry itself, was the kind of attention that a 15-year-old girl is simply not equipped to handle alone. Ed O'Neill was in his early 40s when the show began. He had come up through theater. He had done the hard work of building a craft in an environment that demanded real skill and discipline. He had navigated Hollywood long enough to understand exactly what it could do to people who were not careful, and exactly what it could do to young women in particular who found themselves suddenly famous in ways they had not anticipated. When he looked at Christina Applegate on that set, he did not just see his television daughter. He saw someone who needed looking after, and he made a quiet, personal decision to do exactly that. What Christina has revealed about those early years paints a picture that is both touching and sobering. She has talked about how Ed would position himself near her, during scenes that made her uncomfortable. How he would redirect conversations on set when they started drifting toward territory that was inappropriate for someone her age. How he would speak up in rooms where she did not yet have the confidence or the standing to speak up for herself. None of this was required of him. None of it was in his contract. He did it because it was the right thing to do, and because somewhere along the way, he had decided that this young woman's well-being mattered to him personally. The crew members who worked on Married with Children through its 11-season run have confirmed this dynamic in the years since the show ended. People who were there every day, who saw what happened between takes and after the cameras stopped rolling, have spoken about witnessing something that went far beyond the professional relationship between two colleagues. They watched a genuine mentorship develop in real time. They watched Ed O'Neill take it upon himself to be the steady, grounding presence in a young actress's life at a moment when she desperately needed exactly that. Every relationship has a moment where it gets tested, a moment where the depth of the connection either proves itself or falls apart entirely. For Christina and Ed, that moment came in 1989, just 2 years into the show's run, when a boycott campaign nearly took everything away from both of them. A Michigan woman named Terry Rakolta watched an episode of Married with Children and was sufficiently outraged by what she saw that she launched a full-scale campaign against the show. She contacted advertisers. She wrote letters. She appeared on national news programs. She was organized. She was persistent. And she was effective. Major corporate sponsors began pulling their advertising dollars. The network started having very serious conversations about whether the show had a future. For everyone involved in the production, it was a period of genuine uncertainty and fear. For Christina, who was 17 at the time, the situation was terrifying in a particular way. This show was not just her job. It was her entire professional identity. It was the thing that had launched her career and given her a platform. The thought of losing it before she had the chance to build anything else was genuinely frightening, and she was experiencing that fear as a teenager, with all the emotional vulnerability that comes with that age, in an industry that is not particularly known for its compassion toward people when things go wrong. What Ed O'Neill did during that crisis is something Christina has talked about only recently, and what she describes reveals something important about his character. He did not panic. He did not spend his energy worrying about his own career or his own future. Instead, he focused on the people around him who were struggling. He sat with Christina and with David Faustino, who played her brother Bud on the show, and he talked to them plainly and honestly. He told them that they had created something worth being proud of, regardless of how things turned out. He told them that their value as performers was not determined by whether this particular show survived this particular storm. He also went further than that. Ed spoke publicly in defense of the show at a time when many people within the industry were staying quiet, not wanting to attach themselves to something controversial. He gave interviews. He pushed back against the narrative that the people responsible for Married with Children were engaged in something harmful or shameful, and in doing so, he made sure that the conversation included a defense of the young people who worked on the show, people like Christina, who deserved to have someone standing up for them. The boycott ultimately collapsed in the most ironic way imaginable. The controversy drew massive attention to the show from people who had never watched it before. Ratings climbed. The publicity that was intended to destroy Married with Children ended up giving it a second wind that propelled it to even greater cultural prominence. The Bundy family survived, and in surviving together, the real family that had formed behind the scenes became even more tightly bonded than it had been before. Christina has said in interviews that what she carries from that period is not the memory of the ratings triumph. It is the memory of Ed O'Neill standing beside her when things looked genuinely dark. It is the memory of someone who had every reason to focus exclusively on his own interests, choosing instead to look after the people around him. That is the kind of behavior that leaves a permanent mark on a person. That is the kind of memory that stays with you across decades. When Married with Children was canceled in 1997, it ended without ceremony. There was no farewell episode. There was no deliberate closing chapter that gave the characters or the actors a proper goodbye. One day, they were filming. Then they were not. After 11 years of shared experience, the whole thing simply stopped, and the people who had built something remarkable together were left to process that ending without any real structure for doing so. Christina has spoken candidly about how disorienting that period was. For 11 years, she had gone to that set almost every working day. She had grown from 15 to 26 within those walls. The people she worked with had witnessed her adolescence, her early adulthood, her development as a performer and as a human being. They knew her in ways that very few other people in her life did, because they had been present for so much of her formation. And then, without warning, all of it was gone. The emotional reality of that kind of abrupt ending is something that does not get discussed very often when people talk about what happens when television shows get canceled. There is a grief that comes with it, not just professional grief, but personal grief, the loss of a daily rhythm, a community, a sense of belonging. For Christina, who had spent more than a decade building her identity in large part through her relationships on that set, the ending of Married with Children was a genuinely significant loss. But what she has revealed is that her connection with Ed O'Neill did not end when the show did. They stayed in touch. They checked in with each other. Ed continued to take an interest in her career, offering perspective when she asked for it, and simply being present when she did not. The relationship that had formed on that soundstage proved to be durable in a way that many professional relationships in Hollywood simply are not. Ed went on to remarkable success after Married with Children. His role as Jay Pritchett in Modern Family introduced him to an entirely new generation of viewers and earned him critical recognition that cemented his legacy as one of the great character actors of his era. His career flourished in ways that were deeply satisfying to watch. And yet, by his own account, what he remained most proud of when he looked back at his body of work was not the awards, or the ratings, or the professional milestones. It was watching Christina Applegate become who she became. That is an extraordinary thing for a person to say, and it reveals something important about what their relationship actually was. This was not a professional mentorship that served a temporary purpose and then ran its natural course. This was something that had taken on the weight and the permanence of a genuine family bond. Ed had been there during the years that shaped Christina most profoundly, and that meant something to both of them that time and distance could not diminish. In August 2021, Christina Applegate shared news that stopped the entertainment world in its tracks. She had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The disease had been identified while she was in the middle of filming the final season of her Netflix series Dead to Me, a show that had earned her some of the best reviews of her career, and reminded a younger audience just how formidable a talent she truly was. The diagnosis was not just a medical development. It was a fundamental reorientation of everything about Christina's life. Multiple sclerosis is a chronic progressive disease affecting the central nervous system. It has no cure. It requires ongoing management. Its symptoms, which for Christina have included significant mobility challenges and periods of cognitive difficulty, are unpredictable and can change over time in ways that make long-term planning genuinely complicated. The life she had built and the career she had constructed on her own terms suddenly had to be reimagined from the ground up. Christina has been remarkably open about the emotional dimensions of that reimagining. She has talked about grief in the most honest terms, the grief of losing a version of your future that you had assumed was yours, the grief of watching your body change in ways you did not consent to, the grief of mourning aspects of your life while still living that life and still being expected to function within it. This is not a simple or comfortable story, and Christina has never tried to package it as one. What she has revealed about Ed O'Neill's response to her diagnosis is one of the most significant things she has shared publicly about their relationship. He reached out immediately and genuinely. This was not the kind of perfunctory expression of sympathy that people sometimes offer when they feel socially obligated to say something kind. Ed made clear that he was present, that he was concerned, and that he was available in whatever way was actually useful. After nearly 35 years, the dynamic that had formed when Christina was 15 as the steady, protective presence who shows up when things get hard had not changed at all. The rest of the Married with Children cast rallied around her as well. Katie Sagal, who had played her television mother for 11 years, became a vocal and consistent voice of support. David Faustino, the TV brother who had grown up alongside her on that set, checked in with genuine warmth and care. The family they had created on screen, the one that had been scattered by cancellation and time and the natural drift of lives moving in different directions, gathered itself back together in the face of Christina's crisis. But it was Ed's response that Christina has returned to most often in her public discussions of this period. He was still doing what he had always done. He was still being the person in the room who makes sure you are okay. He was still occupying that role that he had claimed for himself quietly and without fanfare back when she was a teenager, and he decided, for reasons that had nothing to do with professional obligation, to look out for her. In November 2022, Christina Applegate received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. For someone managing the daily physical realities of multiple sclerosis, simply choosing to attend a large public event requires a particular kind of determination. She could have accepted the honor in a private ceremony. She could have sent a representative. She could have found 100 reasonable ways to participate without putting herself in the middle of a crowd with cameras pointed at her every movement. She chose to show up. She arrived with a cane. She moved more slowly than the Christina Applegate that audiences remembered from 2 decades of film and television work. She stood at a podium and delivered a speech that was honest about her circumstances, grateful for the journey that had brought her there, and genuinely emotional in ways that she did not try to conceal or manage. The people who had gathered to celebrate her wept. The people watching at home wept. It was one of those rare public moments where the performance disappears entirely, and what you see is simply a human being, unguarded and present. What came shortly after was even more profound. Christina appeared at the Emmy Awards in January 2023. Walking onto that stage with her cane, she was greeted by something that has become one of the most discussed moments in recent awards show history. The audience rose to their feet. Every single person in that room stood up and applauded, and they kept applauding in a way that made it clear they were not just being polite. They were telling her something. They were expressing something that had been building for the years since her diagnosis, something about what she meant to them and what her willingness to remain visible and honest had given them. Christina responded to that overwhelming moment in exactly the way that people who have followed her career would have predicted. She made a joke. She used humor to hold herself together in the middle of something that was clearly threatening to break her wide open with emotion. She was both heartbreaking and funny simultaneously, which is perhaps the most genuinely difficult thing for a performer to pull off, and she did it effortlessly. The audience laughed and cried at the same time. The private conversations that happened that evening, behind the cameras and away from the broadcast, have been described by Christina in subsequent interviews. People she had worked with years ago came to find her. Former colleagues made their way across the room to tell her what she meant to them. The outpouring of recognition was not just about her diagnosis. It was about the totality of a career and a person, and the way that she had chosen to face an incredibly difficult chapter with the same directness and wit that had defined everything she had ever done. Ed O'Neill was among those who made sure Christina knew he was thinking of her that night. The specifics of their exchange remain private, because both of them have always understood that the most meaningful moments between them belong to them. But Christina has confirmed that his presence in her life, even at a distance, even mediated by the realities of time and geography and the logistics of 2 busy lives, remained one of the constants she leaned on during this period. When the Married with Children cast eventually came together again in the various reunion panels, anniversary celebrations, and interviews that have marked the passage of time since the show ended, something changed in how Christina talked about that period of her life. The reunion format, with its inherent nostalgia, and its invitation to look back honestly at what something meant, gave her permission to say things she had perhaps not been ready to say before. What she exposed was not scandal. It was not the kind of revelation that the entertainment press trades in, built around conflict and betrayal, and the exposure of someone's worst behavior. What she exposed was something far more unusual in an industry that tends to chew through relationships with remarkable efficiency. She exposed the reality of a genuine, lasting, deeply felt bond with a man who had spent decades being quietly and consistently present in her life without ever drawing attention to himself for doing it. She talked about what it meant to be 15 years old and frightened and find yourself in the orbit of someone who simply decided, without being asked, that your well-being mattered to him. She talked about what it meant to watch that person demonstrate, over and over across decades, that his commitment to your welfare was not conditional on what you could do for his career or how much public attention you were generating. She talked about what it meant to receive, at the lowest point of her adult life, the same steady and generous presence that she had first encountered on a television soundstage when she was a teenager. And in talking about all of that, she reframed the story of Married with Children itself, because what she revealed was that the show's most significant legacy was not the groundbreaking humor, or the cultural impact, or the audience numbers, or the influence it had on every edgy family sitcom that followed in its wake. Its most significant legacy was the people it brought together, and the relationships it forged. The real family that formed behind the scenes outlasted the fictional one on screen. The love that developed between those performers proved more durable than the network that canceled them. There is a version of Christina Applegate's story that Hollywood loves to tell. The child star who managed to build a serious adult career. The pretty blonde who surprised everyone by being genuinely talented. The sitcom actress who earned dramatic credibility. That version is true, but it is incomplete. It leaves out the most important part. The most important part is that throughout a career full of reinvention and challenge and genuine hardship, there was a person who showed up. Not because he had to, not because it served any obvious professional purpose, not because there was anything to gain from it. Ed O'Neill showed up for Christina Applegate because he had decided somewhere along the way that she was someone worth showing up for. And he never stopped making that decision, year after year, decade after decade, through everything that changed and everything that stayed the same. What Christina exposed in the aftermath of their reunion was the truth about what sustains a person through a difficult life in a difficult industry. It is not talent alone, though she has that in abundance. It is not resilience alone, though she has demonstrated that quality more powerfully than almost anyone in her generation. It is connection. It is the experience of being genuinely known and genuinely cared for by someone who has no obligation to know or care for you. She was 15 years old when she found that in Ed O'Neill. She is in her 50s now, navigating a health challenge that has required her to remake her relationship with her own body and her own future. And the bond that formed on that television set nearly 4 decades ago is still holding, still present, still as real as it ever was. That is what the reunion revealed. That is what Christina Applegate exposed when she finally started talking about what Ed O'Neill really meant to her. Not a secret, not a scandal, something better than both of those things. The truth that in the middle of a business built on illusion, 2 people found something genuine, and they chose to hold on to it. For anyone who ever watched the Bundy family and wondered if any of it was real, there is your answer. The most real thing about Married with Children was never what happened on the screen. It was what happened just off camera, between a protective man in his 40s and a young woman finding her footing, building something together that neither of them could have predicted, and that neither of them has ever let go. Some things in this industry are manufactured. This was not one of them. And now that Christina has finally said it out loud, the world gets to know what those of us who paid close attention always suspected. The best thing that show ever produced was not an episode or a cultural moment or a ratings milestone. It was a friendship, a family bond that is proven, across every test that life has thrown at it, to be completely and utterly unbreakable.